Welcome to the programme, Gazelle. We're going to talk about your recent trip to the German Parliament, where you went to rally support and assistance for your father. But before we do, have you received any more information on your father's whereabouts?
Unfortunately, no. So me personally, I haven't been able to talk to my dad for 2 years. They don't allow any phone calls between us. And the last phone call my dad had was with my mother this year in February before he got the death sentence. So I don't even know where my dad is. We don't know if he's even alive because we have heard of cases where the death sentence was carried out and the family was not notified. And later on, they were informed that their loved one has been killed already. So we're always worried that my dad might not even be alive, but nevertheless, we're fighting every single day and have the hope that he is alive and that he is okay and that we can get him out of there.
That must be incredibly difficult to live with on a day-to-day basis.
It's a crisis mode that we're going through. So every morning when I wake up, because we're in the US, so we get the information always overnight. Something happens overnight in Iran, and then we hear it the first thing in the morning. So when I see a lot of requests from reporters, my heart starts beating, and I'm thinking, oh my God, what happened in my dad's case? Did something happen to him? And I turn on my phone like right away in the morning just to check like if everything is okay. And that's the absolute like crisis that you have every single morning that you're waking up when you see you have phone calls or missed calls or messages going on because we don't know. We don't have access to him. We don't know anybody over there who knows about his case who we can contact and know for sure that my dad is okay. And this regime is capable of anything pretty much. So it's really hard to tell what's going to happen next.
You must also be anxious about the reports that are coming out about your father being tortured in detention. If you're comfortable to talk about it, can you describe what kinds of maltreatment he suffered and how you came to hear about the abuse?
Our information about his detention is very limited, and most of the information that we have is from the first year where he was still allowed to talk to us every couple of months. And in the last year, he was only allowed 2 phone calls with my mother, and this year only 1 phone call. So most of our information is from the first year. And we know for sure that my dad is in solitary confinement. Now it's over 970 days that he's in solitary confinement. So that alone is psychological torture, is physical torture, just to be in a room by yourself for almost 1,000 days. I can't imagine what happens to you when you don't see a single person in your life that doesn't want to harm you, that doesn't want to kill you or torture you or get you to do forced confession. So we are social beings. We need to be with people who we can talk to. And if that doesn't happen for a period of time, you go crazy. He has all the signs of PTSD. He can't tell what time of the day it is. He can't tell how long he's been there. He can't tell how old my daughter is. He doesn't know like time and space, and everything has pretty much vanished for him. He can't really understand what's going on there. And you can hear from his voice, when we compare his voice now in the last phone call to the voice in the beginning when he was taken. In the beginning, you would hear still this energy in his voice, and now you can hear a broken man. It's very, very low energy. He can barely find the words that he needs in any language. He speaks, like me, English, German, and Farsi, and he's struggling to find words because he's not talking to anybody. We know there's also physical torture because he is a Parkinson's patient. He has advanced stage Parkinson's. He needs to take his medication on time every 3 hours to be able to function, to be able to move and breathe and think. And we know that they're not giving him his medication in the right dose, or they're delaying it. And that alone causes physical pain in his body, that you can't breathe, that you can't move without your medication. He has tried to tell us through these phone calls that he's been tortured too. He told us that he doesn't have teeth anymore. And we don't know if his teeth have been knocked out or if they fell out because of malnutrition or what is going on. We just know he doesn't have teeth. He can't eat food. We know he has shortness of breath. He has diabetes now. He has hypertension. He has chest pains. Just like by sitting down, he has chest pains. And I'm a critical care nurse specializing in coronary care. So I know when you're not moving and you have chest pains, you're just one step away from having a heart attack. So that's a very alarming sign that he has these pains, and he cannot move, he cannot go outside, he cannot see daylight or fresh air. He cannot, as I said, get any kind of information about the world around him and what's going on. And that's torture by itself, that you don't know what's going on outside. Is anybody even fighting for you? Is anybody worried about you? Does anybody know where you are? Like all of this information that's missing, and you're all on your own, and around you are just people who want to kill you and want to harm you. That alone is torture for any person, and he's going through this for almost 1,000 days non-stop.
You had previously been banned from telephoning and speaking to your father whilst he was in detention. Are you now able to speak with him, or are you getting this information from your mother's phone calls with your father?
Just from my mother's phone calls. The phone calls that he had with me in the first year, there were not phone calls where he can speak freely. None of the phone calls he can speak freely. He always says there are like 10 or 15 guards sitting right next to him. So at any time they can break off the conversation. Anytime they tell him what to say, and if we ask a question that we're not allowed to ask, they break off the phone call. So it's very hard to get information out of him. But the phone calls, the intention of them was not because they're good people and they want my dad to be able to speak with his family. Their intention was to force us to cooperate with them. So they were having me write a letter on his letterhead, pretty much confessing that my dad is a terrorist leader of this group and so on. And when they saw that I wouldn't do that, even though they have my dad, they couldn't force me to do that. As a punishment, they broke off the contact with me. And as I said, the only 3 phone calls that he had was with my mother, 2 last year and 1 this year. And through those, we know that he's still in solitary confinement. He's still doesn't get medical treatment, doesn't have access to anybody, and is getting weaker and weaker. So he's slowly dying in that detention. So even if it doesn't come to an execution, he is 68, and I don't know how much longer he can endure this kind of physical and psychological torture that they're doing to him.
All of the things that you've described are patterns that have been recorded in relation to how the Iranian government has been treating its detained dual nationals. And during the life of your father's case, he also made several TV appearances where he was allegedly forced into making a confession and took part in a trial which has been widely criticised by human rights bodies as being unfair. Another issue is that evidence in criminal cases is never shown to the public, and if a defendant in Iran offers evidence to support their innocence, another allegation from human rights bodies is that that evidence is often disregarded. Did your father have any evidence to argue his case that you know of? And if he did, what happened to that evidence?
My father doesn't need any evidence. The courts that we're used to is usually you are innocent until proven guilty. That is not the case in Iran. You're guilty until proven innocent. So when we were looking for a lawyer for my dad, it was not because he committed any crime in any country. We were told that the only person who would have access to my dad is a lawyer. So since we don't know where my dad is, since nobody had access to him, we looked for a lawyer to come and see him, just to see in what state he is, what they're doing to him, and if he's still alive. The lawyer was not allowed to see him. The lawyer was not allowed to see his file. Nobody is allowed to see his file. Nobody was allowed to enter the courtroom, or it's not really, we can't really call it a courtroom. It was a show, a parade, a show trial. And there is no evidence that could show in any way that my dad or any of the other dual nationals did anything wrong. The first time that my dad was allowed to speak in court was at the 6th show trial. And in the 6th show trial, they read all of the accusations against him. And the first thing that my dad says was, I reject all of the accusations. So even after so long of torture, he still had the strength in him to stand there in front of this judge and in front of this parade and say, I didn't do any of this. And that shows me he's still fighting in there. He's still, he's still, after so much torture, he would not budge to all of these propaganda and lies about him. But what we have to understand is these are not real courtrooms. These are not real lawyers. These are not real judges. Even the regime lawyer that was put on his case told us bluntly, he will receive the death sentence. This is not a judicial case. I cannot do anything for him. This is a political case. So all of the verdicts and everything comes from above, and we can't change that. The German government is the only one who can rescue your dad. I cannot argue anything. I cannot say anything there. I'm not allowed to see the file, because if anybody would see the file, they would say that there's nothing that they have. Otherwise, they would parade the evidence that they have on TV. They don't do that. They don't allow real lawyers to go in. They don't allow a real court to happen, because there is nothing that my dad did wrong. They cannot even charge him for any real crime. He's not charged for terrorism. He's not charged for murder. He's charged for corruption on earth. So they had to make up a charge for dissidents, which means nothing. It is such a vague charge. That means you have thought against the regime, you have spoken against the regime, which he's guilty of that, and I'm guilty of that too, and a lot of us are guilty of that. And the crime of speaking against the regime, that the sentence for it is death. That's why he's charged for corruption on earth. That's why all of the people are not charged for espionage. They're charged for other terms. That's why the protesters there are not charged for murder. They're charged for corruption on earth, or war against God, which is absolutely insane that we have such charges. And even in the Islamic regime, you cannot charge somebody with murder if you don't have evidence, but you can charge them for corruption on earth, because that's just your thought against the regime. That's talking against the regime. That's just anything that we're doing is a criminal offense in Iran right now, and they can kill you for it. So they know that, and that's why we can't ask for a true trial, or what many human rights organizations or our government wanted was like a fair trial. There are no fair trials under the Islamic regime. It will not happen. So it's ridiculous to ask for that. We should ask for one thing only, and that's the release of the hostages.
The court sentencing your father said they would allow an appeal to the Supreme Court. Do you feel that that is potentially a tactic that the Iranian government is using to try and leverage a situation in which they want to see the German government alter their behaviour in relation to the way they engage with Iran and its government?
The complete trial was an attempt to put pressure on our governments, the U.S. government, because my dad was also a U.S. national, and the German government and all of the European governments. We know that because, like, when you see his show trials, you can see that his passport, his German passport, is projected on a huge monitor inside of the courtroom. There is no evidence. There's nothing going on. There are pictures of him where they write terrorist on it, and then there's his passport picture sending a message to Germany, hey, we have your citizens, and we're going to kill him if you don't do what we want. And they're telling us also through their channels that this is what they want. They want to put pressure on the German government. They want them to come and do what they want. So this is absolute extortion. This is nothing that they're hiding. They're not ashamed of that, and that's a big problem, that they're not even hiding the fact that my dad and all the others are hostages over there. And the process of going to a superior court is not a real process where a judge would sit and look at the file and really decide, there is no evidence, so he's going to be free. This is the superior court, the judges, the courts in Iran are all under the supreme leader's rule. So they're waiting for the moment that they can either execute my dad by confirming the death sentence, or get a response from the foreign governments that they are seeking right now. So this is all a political game that they're playing, and it is not an opportunity, like some people thought when it goes to the Superior Court, it's an opportunity to recall the sentence. The sentence by the hanging judge of Tehran, Salavati, was never ever recalled. All of his death sentences went through because they're by order. So this is not an opportunity. This is another threat that the regime is putting there and saying, okay, you did not do what we wanted when we gave him the death sentence. Now we're taking it to the next level. If you don't do what we want, we will execute your citizen.
And what do you think the Iranian government wants from Germany and the US?
Oh, they're not ashamed to tell us what they want. They tell that always to the families, never to the government itself, because then it becomes apparent that they're breaking the law and that they're using hostage diplomacy. But they always tell the families, like they told Nazanin Zaghami's family, we want the money that the British government owes, for example. They wouldn't tell that to the government, but as soon as the debt was paid, she was released. So it is very clear. In the case of my dad, they say very, very clearly they wanted their own terrorist, Asadullah Assadi, who is right now in jail in Europe. They want him really, really bad. So that was one of the first things that my dad told us in one of the phone calls earlier in the first year. Because my mom asked him, like, what's with all of these terror charges? Like, what is this? They know that you only talk. They know that about you. And he said, yeah, but they're telling me the more criminal I look, the more like a terrorist I look, the higher my price will be in order to exchange me for this terrorist that is right now in Europe. So this game that they're playing, they're not hiding it, and they're telling us that we want Asadullah Assadi, we want our own criminals back, we want Germany to come to the table and negotiate with us. So we assume they want back to the JCPOA, we assume they want money, we assume they want their criminals back, and they're not hiding it at all. They're very frank about that and telling us this from day one, what they want.
As we mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, you were in Germany last week fighting to garner support for your father at the Bundestag. Who did you speak to while you were there, and how are you feeling after those meetings?
This trip was, in one word, it was like bringing the hurricane to Berlin, pretty much. That's what everybody called it. Like, we were like a storm there. In 72 hours, we had so many meetings with very high people in the government, in the foreign ministry, in the office of the chancellor, in all of the political parties, the MPs, anybody pretty much who we could get in these 3 days said yes to us, and we're very open to seeing me and to listening to my story and to listening to what we had to say about hostage taking, about my dad, about the situation in Iran, because as I always say, my dad is not just one case. There are thousands of Jimmy Sharmahds that have been kidnapped, that have been dissidents, that have been fighting for human rights for years. My dad, 16 years of his life, he was fighting for the people of Iran. So there are many people like him outside that have been kidnapped or assassinated. And there's so many in Iran that don't have foreign citizenship, that are just like my dad, and their daughters would like to do what I'm doing, go to a government to tell them the story, and they can't. So when we are there, when I'm talking to anybody in power, I'm always talking on behalf of all of us and not just my father. My father is a good example that shows the outreach of this terror regime, that shows that people are not safe in any country. My dad was almost assassinated in the US. He was kidnapped on a flight overlay in Dubai. He is a German citizen. All of our friends in Germany are in danger right now. European citizens, there have been French citizens who have been kidnapped, Swedish citizens who have been kidnapped. So this is not an isolated case, and that was very important for me to tell them this story, to start talking about hostage diplomacy, because in my dad's case and all of these cases, we're still not talking about the big elephant in the room, that these are hostages. We're still talking about prisoners or political prisoners. No, these are absolute hostages, and we have to talk about that, because if we don't name it, we cannot find a solution. And the Islamic regime had started with hostage taking 44 years ago, when they took the whole US embassy hostage at that time. And this practice has become stronger and stronger throughout these years, and we have not talked about it. We have avoided this subject. We have to talk about it right now. We have to talk about another way we're dealing with terror regimes, just like we changed strategy with Russia. We have to change strategy with Iran. And I had the feeling after all of these talks with everybody over there that something has moved in them. I had a positive feeling that things are moving, that people are taking the first steps, that they're not afraid anymore. We gave them some maybe courage to take the right steps and to go into the right direction. Many of them already did. Many of them were already on our side, but there were also people who were afraid that this might harm people or endanger people. And we showed them pretty much that this is the right strategy to take. These people have to be rescued. These people are hostages, and we have to treat this regime as a terrorist organization and stop negotiating with them, stop treating them like a sovereign state or a real government, which they are not. So to sum it all up, I have the feeling, as I said, as like a storm, we moved everything around, and I hope the first steps are going to be good and great into the right direction. This is just the beginning, though. This is just the beginning of what we want to achieve and what we want to do. We will continue, not just in Germany. We're working together with all of the hostage families in Europe to build a workforce in Europe, because it's a European problem. It's not just each country on their own. As I said, 2 Swedish citizens right now have the death sentence, like my dad. And last year I talked to the Swedish government. I talked about, this will happen to you guys. You have to work with your allies together. If you on your own, you're not strong enough. You have to work with your allies, even with the US. All of these people have the same problem. So if we put all of our governments together, we have leverage. Germany alone has so much leverage with their companies that are working there, and we have to start using that leverage and not let terror regimes run us over and do whatever they want.
Are you able to give a little bit more detail about those next steps that were confirmed in Germany and who you spoke to, perhaps even at the highest level, who gave you their support and confirmed that they would assist in some way?
And you have to understand, I can't name the names that on the highest level that I spoke to for obvious reasons, but I can tell you that it was very, very, very high level that I spoke to, and I was very happy about that. The names, yeah.
That's okay.
I would love to name names, but we have to, of course, respect that, because we still have a lot of business with these people, and we want to continue on this path. The lobby group that we have over there is still active, even though I'm not over there. I still have my people over there who are continuing what we're doing, and we're in close contact with these people. The next steps, of course, will be to reach out on a European level. That was one of the tasks that we gave to all of our politicians, to reach out to their counterparts in all of the other European states and work together on a task force. And I cannot talk too much about what we want to do, because everything that I say, the regime is listening to, and we don't want to tell them all of our strategies. But a lot of things will happen, hopefully very soon. And we're working every day very hard on that, to connect everybody, to get all of our allies on the same place, to work all with the diaspora, with the people of Germany, Europe, and America towards a common goal.
This is obviously an incredible physical feat and an emotional feat and a cerebral feat, because it's non-stop for you. You're doing this every day, and you're doing this with a group of people, and you are trying to incorporate ever larger circles into this campaign. And in an interview with Zeit Online on the 31st of March, you talk about that emotional and physical toll of your father's kidnap and imprisonment specifically, including a miscarriage you suffered. Are you happy to talk a little bit about that, and whether you feel that deeply saddening loss is linked to your father's plight in some way?
I mean, absolutely. Your body and your mind are so deeply connected, and a pregnancy is a time where you want to be in peace, where you want to enjoy the life that's growing in you. And if you are pretty much fighting on all fronts, and we were fighting against a terror regime, but we were also fighting against our own governments that were not doing what they're supposed to do, protect us, protect their own citizens. And I know my life is at risk. I know my whole family's life is at risk. So, of course, all of this pressure built up in me. And unfortunately, I suffered another miscarriage at that time, which was very hard, but I don't like to talk too much about my personal life, because this regime, you have to understand, they're psychopath. They're not people who would be affected in any way, but by what they're done to the families of the people. To the contrary, they would laugh at you if you show that you're suffering, if you show any kind of weakness, and they would use this image of you to torture the prisoner. They would torture my dad by knowing this. So this is why I try not to talk too much about it. But this is a very important point. I wish we had a world in which we had an organization or a government body that would take care of what we're doing right now as hostage families. I wish we did not have to fight that hard with hashtags, with phones, with activists worldwide. I wish we had an organization there that would do that for us, and we would just sit back and be ourselves and could relax and live our lives while worrying, of course, still about the prisoner. But this is not the case. We don't have an organization. That is maddening that we don't have anybody. So if your loved one is taken hostage or is kidnapped by a regular criminal, you would call the police. There would be a task force. There would be like the SWAT team over here that would be at your side. There would be media attention. There would be any kind of support that you can think of that you need. You will have that. But if your loved one is taken by another government that they're making business with, you have nobody to talk to. Like that was the first thing that we were like, who do we tell? Who's going to help us? Our government obviously did not want to lose their business relationships or their political relationship with that other government. So we're working at two fronts at the whole time. And this is a huge mistake. And that's why it's so important to us to have a task force for all of the European hostage families who are struggling like us, who have to fight their own way, try to get attention. For 2.5 years, I didn't have attention on my dad's case. Nobody knew my dad was kidnapped, which is horrific because there's so many kidnapping cases in the last years. And if nobody knows about it, we're all walking in the same trap. This can all happen to us. Exposing what the regime is doing to us overseas gives us protection and makes sure that people like my dad, who are in the hundreds right now, walking the streets in Europe and everywhere, will not have the same fate as my dad, will not fall for the same trap. So this is very, very important. And I wish we had some support there, which we don't. But I also know that we didn't have this kind of support in America before Levinson was taken, before James Foley was taken. So it was because of these families and their engagement and their activism that now in America we have the Special Presidential Envoy for Hostage Affairs, which is in the US State Department, which works with the FBI, which works with the press, which has so many resources. We have the Levinson law. We have laws based on that, which is amazing. We need that in Europe. This is missing in Europe. And if you look at it now, most of the hostages in Iran are European hostages, and we don't have a workforce. So that is incredibly maddening that we don't have that. And that's why this is going to be our first next step. We need a workforce.
Well, as you've so powerfully demonstrated, despite everything that you've been through, you're still campaigning, you're still making social media pleas and advocating every day and night on behalf of your father, which is nothing short of extraordinary. What's next in the campaign for your father? Are you traveling somewhere else? Are you speaking to people in other countries? What are you going to do next?
Because the regime watches every single step of me, I could not even tell anybody that I was going to Germany. Just when we were there, I could tell people. We had a security company that was around me 24 hours protecting me. It's sad that we have to do all of these things. I'm just like traveling to my own country, my home country, and Germany, and I can't do it without all of these security people around me. So I would not be able to tell you where I'm going next and what I'm doing next. What can I tell you? I'm thinking right now. What can I tell you about it? The next steps will be definitely following up with everybody that we talk to, making sure that the seeds that we planted are going to grow rapidly, because we know we don't have much time in my dad's case. And in many other cases of death sentences there, we know Habib Chab, a Swedish citizen that was also kidnapped through Turkey and is there, got his death sentence, and the death sentence got confirmed by the Superior Law Court. So we know at least two European citizens' life is an imminent risk of execution. So things have to move fast. That's why we built this workforce in Germany, and we will also at the same time simultaneously work on our connections here in the US and make sure that my dad's case finally gets recognized, that gets taken up by the Special Presidential Envoy for Hostage Affairs. And we want to connect these countries and use all of their leverage that they have. We spoke, of course, with our political sponsor, Friedrich Merz from the CDU. We are working on a movement that will encourage the German companies that are still making millions of dollars with this Islamic terror regime to stand on the side of the people instead of the side of the regime, and be our allies and stand up for the prisoners. So that is another movement that we're planning right now, and hopefully that will give us enough leverage to save lives.
Is there anything else that you would like to say, whether it's a message to Germany's politicians, the international community, or the Iranian government itself?
I never speak to the Islamic regime, because if I thought these were people that would be influenced by words, I would be very, very far off. These are not people, you cannot speak to them. So I never have a message to them. I have a message to, of course, my government, the German government, the US government. It is obvious that you have failed us. It is obvious that you have not done what needed to be done when your citizen was kidnapped, tortured, and sentenced to death. And nevertheless, even though you've proven that you haven't done what you had to do, I believe in people. I believe that people go into politics for the right reasons. And I believe that you have just been misguided by old policies, by old ways of thinking. And I hope that with our engagement and with talking to me, I have convinced you that there is the time to change strategy, to have a new look on how to handle these things. And I hope you will act on this now. I want to say thank you to all of our supporters throughout all of these years in Germany, worldwide, in Iran. You don't know how many people from Iran are calling me saying thank you, because they can't do what I'm doing. They can't speak up. They can't go in front of the cameras, and they all suffer the same way that I'm suffering, because their dads are in prison, their brothers are in prison, their sisters are in prison. And another point, just besides the thanks and everything that we're doing, is I hope that everybody learns that we're talking about our citizens here. They are not dual nationals, and I hate this term dual nationals, because Iranians or people of Iranian descent can never give up their citizenship. My dad can never give up his citizenship. I cannot give up my citizenship. This citizenship that the Islamic regime is giving us is not a citizenship. It is a ownership papers, pretty much, that they're giving us. And they want to own us, which means even though my dad was 7 years old when we moved to Germany, he lived there 40 years. He lived in the US for 20 years. So 60 years out of his life, he lived somewhere else. They still want to take ownership of him. So he should be seen as a German citizen only, because he is not a citizen of a terrorist regime. None of us are. Everybody in Iran who has only their Iranian passport are hostages of this terror regime. So none of us are citizens of this terror regime. And especially those that are fled the country and lived in exile and couldn't go back. We are not owned by this terrorist regime, and that's very important to me to say. We are just mono citizens of whatever country we move to, and it's very important to me, not because I think it's better to be a foreign citizen or anything like that. By no means. It's important to me because they're using that as an excuse not to do enough. They're using that as an excuse to say, well, if he was not an Iranian citizen, we could do more for him. This is an absolute excuse. He should be treated just like a normal German citizen. All of them should be. And what does it mean if our citizenship doesn't mean anything when our life is in danger, when it counts? All of a sudden we are not a citizen. So that is a very important message that I want to give out to all of the so-called dual nationals, all of our governments that are talking about these hostages as dual nationals. They are not. They are our nationals. They're taken hostage by a terrorist regime. They should be freed right now. And thank you to everybody who's supporting us. Thank you to the people of Iran who are fighting so hard and giving us strength. Thank you to the politicians who are standing on our side. Thank you to the journalists who are being loud and giving my dad and other people immunity by naming their names, by telling their stories. This is what saves his life.
Thank you so much for your time, Gazelle, and I wish you all the best with your campaigning.
Thank you.